Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of the Men's Sexual Mastery Podcast. Today, we're honored to have a special guest with us. Emily of Moujamoon is here joining myself and Ben today to bring in a female's perspective on some of the important things for us as men to know about women and cycles, and particularly, well, I'll just say that Emily is a fertility awareness educator. So there'll be some pieces coming in here around contraception, around fertility, hormones, and we'll see whatever else wants to come through. But Emily, I'd love to pass it off to you. Thank you so much for being here with us. And how would you expand on the fertility awareness educator title that you might go by in spaces and places? And what else would you like to speak to about yourself and how you show up in the world
Mm.
in service to what it is that you're here to bring through?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Ian and Ben, for having me here. I'm so happy to be here to speak with the men and to just really bring more diversity into these important conversations that we're having around contraception, cycle tracking, pleasure, libido, etc. So, as you said, I'm a fertility awareness educator. So, a fertility awareness educator like myself means that I'm someone who teaches women about how their bodies work, how their fertility and cycle works, so they can track their cycle in the most reliable and objective way possible to have really clear information about where they're at in their cycle and in their hormones for many applications. So tracking your cycle, your real biomarkers of fertility, like your cervical mucus, which we're going to talk lots more about today, your fertile fluids, your basal body temperature, even things like your cervical position, opening, and texture. This is all very nerdy ways for a woman to objectively connect to her body on a daily basis so she can have this information in her cycle tracking to excitingly avoid pregnancy in a way that is up to 99.6% effective. So, equally as effective as an IUD or the pill without needing to put up with any interesting, odd, weird little side effects of birth control that just maybe make pharmaceutical choices just not feel like a good fit for her. And it also means that we can use that same information to become pregnant consciously when it feels like the right time for us, not to mention the zoom out of what it means to walk through the world as a woman who is in touch with her cyclical changes and in touch with the shifts of her hormones, not only when you have regular cycles in more predictable chapters of life, but also to really stay attuned and connected to your hormonal changes and fluctuations with cycle tracking when your cycles are irregular, whether you have endometriosis, whether you have PCOS, if you're postpartum and your bleed has not come back for a long time, not to mention this life skill really supporting you in your connection to yourself, your connection to partners in times of change like perimenopause as well. So fertility awareness method and fertility awareness method tracking is really this beautiful zoom out of a lifelong skill that supports women in so many different aspects of being connected to themselves. But for me, one of those applications that feels most exciting is highly effective, trustworthy, conscious contraception that we can really rely on and feel good about as women.
Amazing. Yeah, I can really feel your passion and your depth
Mm.
and breadth of awareness around these different topics. And I'm also present to the reality that many of our listeners may have just been like, whoom, blown open. There was a bunch of words there I didn't understand. And shout out to, we have about 10% of our listeners are women. So shout out to the women tuning in to the Men's Sexual Mastery Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Mhm.
We love you. And with that, it leaves about 90%
Yeah.
of our listeners are men. And
Mhm.
so, what would you say to the male listeners right now on why they should be tuning in to hear what it is that you have to share? Why is it important for us as men to understand what it is that you have so deeply studied?
Yeah, I mean, are you guys ready for me to go right to the point, right to the center of it all?
If
This is
yeah,
a
I just feel like
vitally
high
We're
level,
men. We love that.
like let's just hit us with it. Hit us with it, Emily.
This is such a vitally important conversation to have because every single unplanned pregnancy somehow involved irresponsible ejaculation. And we're doing birth control 100% wrong if we put 100% of the onus on the people, the women that are only fertile 6 days per cycle. And a woman could only be a part of maximum one unintended pregnancy per year. But in theory, a man could be a part of an unlimited amount of unintended pregnancies over the course of a year. And he is the one who is fertile 365 days a year. So for me, when we just strip back all of the social programming around who is responsible for safety in sexuality and who just gets to fully lean into pleasure without a greater sense of responsibility, we're just really doing it completely backwards rather than including the people that are fertile all the time, men, in the conversation around what does that look like to collaborate and cooperate with our sexual partners in order to only have a pregnancy occur when the two people engaging together are really excited and want that to happen. And what does it look like for women to also lean into fully enjoying their sexual pleasure without the burden and the fear and the stress of an unplanned pregnancy happening behind that, which absolutely is impeding their presence and their pace and their pleasure in the moment. Yeah, that's why I think this is a really important conversation for men as well.
Yes. Boom. Mic drop. And guess what, man? We have a responsibility here.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
And
thank you for just speaking clearly to that. And we're all for men taking responsibility for areas of whether it's sexual relating or contraception and everything else in a relationship. There is so much here for us as men to reclaim responsibility for, and there is an empowerment in that, and that's one of the big points that Ben and I and Men's Sexual Mastery really drive home, is that this is, yes, it can feel like more work. It could feel like, I don't want to think about that. But when we do, and when we understand, and when we have the tools to operate, it's empowering. And it's empowering for us. And what I heard you speak to there, Emily, I believe, is that it also creates a level of safety and spaciousness for our partners that allows the blossoming and the unfurling of her sexual aliveness and her trust in the relationship. And so there's so much here for us as men when we take responsibility for these things and we empower ourselves through knowledge and then action, that then leads to so much, such a generative, nourishing relationship that we get to have with our partners and the women in our lives. So, Ben, I think you had something to add in there. You want to?
yeah, I was going to mention, I think the point you just made is awesome. It's the perfect, I mean, the way you framed it, Emily, I love it. Just the responsibility we have as men, and responsibility can seem like kind of a heavy word, but as Hawks is speaking to, and as I know we all agree on, there's a ton of pleasure waiting for us in learning about our partner's cycles. And we've spoken to this before on other podcasts, and I'm excited to bring it in, with a new frame from you, Emily. But I know for me personally, just, I'll speak to like tracking my partner's cycles and knowing where she's at and adapting my interactions with her to her cycle is what Hawks, what you're referring to as well. Creating that spaciousness, it helps her blossom. It opens up relating and intimacy in all the ways, and it makes her feel so much more held. And to me, like the byproduct of that is just checking this box of being responsible with contraception, of course, like that's very important. And also there's so much depth of intimacy to be unlocked as we begin to attune and understand and study our partner's cycle. So yeah, just echoing all of that, and really excited to get into this with you, Emily.
Yeah, for sure. And even with this word responsibility that all three of us have brought up, that we all agree maybe isn't the sexiest word that one can use. Really, what does it mean? Respond ability, right? Someone's ability to respond. And that's something that I've heard you guys talk about a lot, right? Is this ability to respond to your partner. So that doesn't just only mean responding to her breath and touch in an intimate moment when people are having an erotic experience together, but also like responding to her in that interaction in the kitchen when she's in the luteal phase, right? Like being able to respond to her outside of the bedroom as well, based on what her hormones are doing. Yeah.
Oof, I love the idea of just the response to her closure, and like we
Mhm.
talk all the time about responding to her opening, but what I'm sensing, especially with the luteal,
Mhm.
is like when she's in a
Mhm.
more inward state or drawn in,
Mhm.
like how are we responding in those times when it may seem like the opposite of intimacy.
Totally. Yeah, and I'm excited to even talk about that because there can often be this like drastic oversimplification of our cycle in which it's like, oh, okay, yeah, fertile time, the ovulation time is this time in which a woman is going to be, really turned on and have this high libido. And then outside of that time, not so interested in it. But I would love to flip that on its head and get way more nuanced about it all, which it just means that pleasure and connecting is going to look very different in different parts of the cycle, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that there is one part of the cycle where a partner is feeling more sexual and available, and other parts where they are maybe more withdrawn. It might mean that during some of these other more withdrawn phases, the connection means tending to her nervous system, right? In order to then see if there might be space after some of this more nervous system, beautiful innocent tending, that perhaps she does actually want to lean into a little bit more of an erotic intimacy, right? So it just means that there are different frequencies of the pleasure that a woman maybe feels drawn to in different parts of the cycle, not a high libido time and a low libido time.
Yeah, since we're here, and this is a juicy topic and something
Hmm.
that I imagine is sparking the interest of some listeners right now. Emily, just before we go into, and I want to make sure that we absolutely go into this contraception and the responsibility of men and what we can do in that world of intentional contraception and intentional conception. And since we're here around cycles and yeah,
Hmm.
libido, what
Hmm.
do you, from your perspective,
Yeah.
what would women love for men to know and understand about the the lunar cycle, the 28
Hmm.
day or plus minus however many days? I know that fluctuates depending on the individual, but what is it important for men to know about female
Hmm.
cycles and then how that pertains to libido and sexuality?
Yeah. When I've really checked in with my people, what I heard from so many women is that they want their lovers and partners to approach them with the intention of giving, not with the intention of getting from her in this moment. Because so many women are already in a state of giving and doing and perceiving other people's needs, that they're not interested in a sexual relationship that feels like one more thing on their to-do list, but rather a place in her life where this is actually an opportunity for her to completely switch that nurturing dynamic and receive from the masculine and receive this beautiful energy, so that this is an opportunity for her to recharge and know that this is this special change of pace in her life where someone comes to offer to her and take care of her. And what we know about feminine energy is if you give to a woman, she's going to give back times 10, because that is just simply the nature of feminine creation, right? You offer a sperm, she's going to give you a baby. And so it doesn't take much to really switch that dynamic and say, this is my place to give to a woman, because I know that in my giving, the receiving is unavoidable. The receiving back from this woman is inevitable if I can really look at this time of sexual interaction as a place where she comes first.
So that's high level. Would you say that's like high level? Doesn't matter where she's at in her cycle. That's an important place for men to just start from, the understanding that, okay, it's important that I'm showing up in the erotic part of our relationship with that energy of giving, and with the
Mm-hmm.
understanding that as I continue to show up in that way, it's inevitable that that will be
Mm-hmm.
returned. And
Mm-hmm.
I love your example of you give one sperm and then a baby arrives 9 months later. That is incredible. And I have often used the analogy in this situation of gardening. And it's very
Mm-hmm.
similar analogy. You plant a seed in the garden, and you know uh, pat the soil and give it some water, and a plant grows up, and then there's the
Mm-hmm.
vegetables to harvest. And it's this,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we start by giving, and then when we
Mm-hmm.
really show up with that energy in a good way, then the fruits are returned tenfold, as you said, or
Mm-hmm.
more. So yeah, so I see nodding along with that is like the high level. And then what would you offer to the listeners for your perspective of how we can adjust based on where she's at in the cycle, and with some of those nuances that you spoke to?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think that, as we said earlier at the top, it's like women want pleasure, but it's like what women want pleasure every single day. But what does that pleasure look like in different parts of the cycle based on where she is hormonally? And like I said, not just only month to month in predictable cycles of life, but also when she's postpartum, when she's in perimenopause. What does serving her with some daily pleasure look like and feel like there? Oftentimes in a non-sexual context as well, right? So really what I love to attune to whenever I talk to anybody about cycles is that, first of all, as a fertility awareness educator, we throw out the idea of cycle day counting. So we don't kind of predict or guess what's going on based on, oh, she's on cycle day 11-ish. It'll be kind of like this. Oh, she's on cycle day 21-ish. She'll be kind of like this, based on this false assumption that ovulation happens on day 14, and based on the false assumption that, based only on knowing her cycle day, we'll know where she's at in her cycle. Follicular phase, bleeding until the day of ovulation. Luteal phase, after ovulation until the time that we're bleeding. It's important to know that that follicular phase can actually be any length of time, but the luteal phase is always locked in at about 2-ish weeks. And so you could have a partner that is actually experiencing her heightened libido around cycle day 22, because that could be the day that she is ovulating in that month. And when we're tracking our cycle, her understanding her fertile fluids, taking her basal body temperature, her partner becoming just as fluent in that terminology, in that language. It's not only the woman in the relationship that can understand how to interpret her fertile signs from her chart. Her partner is just as capable to learn the language and the basics and chart along with her. And so with that, there can be this in the moment, real time feedback from her body that her partner is understanding about what kind of different hormonal state she's in. So if we get a little bit more specific, when we're done our period and we're in that early follicular phase, that's when our estrogen is beginning to rise. And estrogen is this beautiful hormone that causes engorgement within tissues all over the body. So our entire bodies are filled with hormone receptors. Particularly in the female body, two areas that are particularly dense in hormone receptors would be the breast and the vulva and your internal reproductive anatomy. So, estrogen is a hormone of building and growth and blood flow and engorgement. So, when her period is done and she's in, if she has regular cycles, she's in maybe like a, 1 to 2 week lead up to waiting for ovulation to happen. estrogen will continue to rise. And I like to use the terms from Emily Nagoski, which is this idea of spontaneous desire and responsive desire. So the closer a woman moves towards this very short 12 to 24-hour process of ovulation, the egg is actually only available and viable for implantation for conception for just 12 to 24 hours. That's it. But as she moves through this fertile week that leads up until this moment, her body is literally on a physical level ramping her up to encourage her to propagate her species. I don't call it birth control, natural birth control, because birth doesn't need to be controlled. Women's bodies don't need to be controlled. I call the practice conscious contraception because we're using our consciousness and our mind's awareness of what our body wants to do in order to make smart choices that align with what we do or don't want in life. Because during that fertile time, her body's experience is not really interested in baby or no baby. Her body is interested in propagate the species. Get busy with your partner because everything in her physiology is driving her towards the hope of being intimate with a partner for the potential of propagating her species, which is why we get smart in our consciousness and just make sure that sperm doesn't end up in the body during that time in whatever way we make that happen, right? So essentially, as a woman is really in this fertile state, this fertile place, estrogen is already pre-activating engorgement and blood flow to her reproductive anatomy internally and externally, both to her reproductive organs like her ovaries, her cervix, and also to her pleasure organs like her clitoris, etc. So you'll find that a woman during this time, if she has typical hormone balance, that this will be a time in which she is arriving with spontaneous desire already. So there's no coincidence that you might find that there are certain times of the cycle in which a partner is not so interested in such a long type of foreplay as maybe she really is asking for in a different part of the cycle, because estrogen honestly already puts a woman into a potentially aroused state. Nothing to do with necessarily the input of what she's finding attractive around her, but just through her internal hormonal profile at the time, which I find so interesting. I could go on, but I'm going to pause my nerdiness just to hear what you guys have to say about your thoughts on this.
Love all of this, Emily. This is really beautiful nuance. I'm curious. So, one big takeaway I'm hearing just now is that piece around her, the foreplay may not need to be so present during those times of heightened estrogen. And what about when she's in some of the, you spoke earlier to like some of the more nervous system safety work we could do if she's in a more withdrawn state, if she's in her luteal, if she's in her bleed. Could you speak a little more around how you recommend men best approach women in that time?
Yeah, for sure. And so, as we were talking about this heightened estrogen as she moves towards the single one day of ovulation, she also gets a bump of testosterone right around that time of her cycle. So one thing I'll say to the 10% of female listeners is one thing that I love to remind women is that that way you feel when you're just like on the edge of ovulation, have some compassion for your partner that's the most similar experience to what he feels every single day. You get this little bump of testosterone that maybe lasts 2-3 days at one point in your cycle. He's waking up with that every morning. And when I teach in person, I see the women kind of look at their partner and look down and have a little bit of a laugh of like, oh, okay, the way that I feel right then at like the peak of my life force energy, just like driving me to want intimacy and sex, is is kind of like what my partner is like when he approaches me in those moments in the kitchen in my late luteal phase where you're like, what are you thinking about right now, right? So just having that awareness also for the women to really tap into what is the male experience here, right? What is the male experience of libido and sex drive? And so estrogen and progesterone is what takes over in the luteal phase, are really this beautiful yang and yin type aspect. So while estrogen really opens and blooms and might make a woman feel so confident and outgoing and sexually charged, progesterone is that vitally important, necessary equal balance of her then returning to herself and her coming back in connection and attunement to herself. And on a physiological level, estrogen softens, lifts, and opens the cervix in order to actually make space for more easeful penetration during her fertile time. And then during the luteal phase, progesterone comes in to lower the cervix again, to harden it, to firm it up in order to close the opening and to even tilt it back closer to the rectum rather than forward towards the bladder, so that her internal organ of her uterus is now closed and safe and protected from any potential outside entrance in case a pregnancy has started. It wouldn't make sense for the female body to give unlimited access to an internal organ all the time. So it only opens and softens during the fertile time. And then during that luteal phase and other infertile times of the cycle, most often menstruation is also infertile, then really we're working from the ground up if we're wanting to approach our partner, meaning that's the time where she's going to experience that typical need for minimum 45 minutes of activation and engagement before her tissues reach a full level of engorgement, a full level of feeling turned on. So she doesn't have that estrogen and testosterone bolstering her and putting her in this spontaneous place of desire. In her luteal phase and other infertile times, she may more likely be in a responsive state of desire, meaning it's maybe not coming to her mind. It might not be the top of her list, but responsive desire being that she may very well be open to receiving that beautiful foot massage, to you drawing a bath for her, right? Even the simple pleasure of cooking that meal for her. And then all of a sudden, there's just that opportunity for the to-do list of the day to fall away, right? And for her to soften into this more receptive place of, I'm actually being cared for in this non-sexual way, that I'm now experiencing this beautiful response to the giving, in which I'm thinking it might be nice to move a little bit closer to him. It might be nice for this massage to just continue and see what happens from there. But in these other parts of our cycle, really meeting our partners with this knowing that she's interested in connecting in more nurturing ways before she's ready to open up to the erotic.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you've brought in this element of foreplay and the differences in within a cycle of length of foreplay that will be
Mm.
required to allow that opening, that engorgement of the tissues. And I just want to clarify again for listeners that might be following along, but like, okay, but wait, what part of the cycle are we talking about? So please correct me here if I'm mistaken, but what I'm hearing is that in the follicular phase, which for listeners who might not be aware is you said it starts at the beginning of the bleed, correct? Technically, follicular starts at the like on day one of the cycle, which is when the
There's
bleed
two,
begins.
there's two ways to think about it. And for anyone listening, I also have a YouTube channel that has a lot of visuals because I'm like a former elementary school teacher. So like I go hard on like all of the learning support. So there's some great visuals that can help people there. There's two ways to think about the cycle. The first way would be the 4 phases, right? Which would be period or menstruation, follicular, ovulatory, which is an important distinction than ovulation, right? Ovulation is 1 day. Ovulatory can be any length of time, actually. And then there's the luteal phase, which is the premenstrual time while we're waiting to bleed. So that's the one way to think about it with the 4 phases. But we could actually simplify it down that follicular also includes the first day of your bleed up until ovulation. That whole thing can also be called the follicular phase, but we can break the follicular phase down into bleeding, early dry infertile days, juicy cervical mucus fertile days. But then once that's over, we just go then into the second half, which is the luteal phase, which we don't kind of need to further break down the luteal phase. So there's a few different ways to look at the cycle.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, I think for the purpose of, if we're looking at this foreplay perspective, we can think about the days in follicular, which are leading up to ovulation, as it's likely that there will be less foreplay required for a woman's body to be ready for penetration, to be ready for sexual engagement. And that's not to say that just throw foreplay out the window, but understanding that, I could see a man being like, well, the last time we had sex, it seemed like you were ready to go right away and it was awesome and everything was great, but now your body isn't responding that way. What's going on? And so it can be worth, just for us as men, having that lens of perspective to draw upon of, oh yeah, okay, she did ovulate a few days ago or a week ago, so that means now she's in her luteal phase, which, oh yeah, Emily was saying it's important that I come with more nurturing energy, and her body might actually need 45 minutes of tender love and care to actually reach that place of engorgement and openness that she was available to in 5 minutes a couple of weeks ago. So,
Totally.
so yeah, I love that, and it's good to, we're often reminding men that every woman's body is different, and even the same woman on a different day is going to, it's still, we're approaching something new every day, which is amazing because it keeps life so exciting and dynamic, and it keeps us as men on our toes. So yeah, thank you for breaking that down for us. And I had a question that I really wanted to bring to you, Emily. I heard you speak to the importance of us showing up with this giving energy when it comes to eroticism and sexual connection, and I'm on board with that 100%. I feel like that is absolutely a gift that we have to give. And as we were speaking to, it's also an opportunity for us to receive so much. But we first show up with that energy of giving, not with the expectation of, okay, I'm going to get this in return, but just show up with that generosity and that energy of giving. And for a lot of men, that's a natural place to be in. And since we're speaking to nuances here, I can say for myself, there are times when I really want to feel my partner's initiation of sex. I want to feel her step into that archetype of the seductress to meet me. And
Yes.
because also a lot of men are in a lot of giving energy a lot of the time. And so to come home at the end of the day of work and to feel our partner be in that energy of, okay, she put something sexy on and she's going to greet you, and really like take the man on a ride of eroticism. That for me is something that is incredibly nurturing, and it's not that I want or need that all of the time. I'm happy to be in that giving position the majority of the time. And I'd love to hear from you. What's your perspective on that role reversal? Is there a time and a place for the woman to step into that energy of, okay, I'm going to take my man on this ride of eroticism tonight?
Yes, absolutely. I love this question because even as we've been talking, we're using these very simplified terms of the man's like this and the woman's like this. But I think everyone listening and everyone here knows that there is so much more depth and nuance to all of that, to individuals being different, not to mention the private individual sexual interactions and play and kinks that different people also want to explore as well. And so, what I love to, guide my women to do and really talk to my women about regarding these kinds of opportunities for her to also take charge and initiative in her sexuality is so deeply empowering for women in a world in which being sexual is so often like a safety risk, right? It's a big healing journey for a woman to fully be in that sacred whore energy where she knows that she gets to be vivacious, that she gets to be a seductress, and that she is totally honored and revered and worshiped in this state of her beautiful erotic expression, and that this is not something that is going to be dangerous for her, right? And so there's so much ancestral baggage and retuning that an individual woman can go through in order to finally land at this place where she feels so comfortable with that. And so for me, one way that I really guide my women to go on that journey and that path is that the safety of her connecting to that begins with herself, right? Begins in her own relation to her body. And especially when you've got this little seductress plan when he gets home later tonight, even her asking herself, like, what does my time with myself look like for that 1 to 2 hours before he arrives home? A practice I love for this would even be pelvic steaming. So a woman doing her pelvic steam, sitting on her seat, leaning over her bowl of beautiful herbs. A little side quest. I've even had girlfriends, as we swap secrets, say, hey, if you steam with this, then you're going to taste a particular way. So there's even little fun things that one can get into with all of that. Um, but this idea of sitting and having her own erotic time of connection to herself, yoni steaming, doing her breast massage, doing her belly massage, and then being in that place where she just feels so ready to greet her man at the door for a beautiful surprise during this fertile time. And I also love that we've been talking about the word foreplay, but I think you would both agree that there's also something really limited around this distinction of sex and what isn't sex and what is foreplay
Yes.
and what isn't, because it really is all just relationship, right? It's one big weave of human beings coming into connection with each other. And so, really allowing the woman to have this spaciousness in order to feel the seductress within, to connect to the seductress within, and then know that she can bring this to a partner. And one thing that I heard so many years ago that just felt so true for me is that something that is so missing in women's sexual experiences is space, right? The space to experiment, the space to explore. You've talked about the word blossoming, the space for her to come into that blossoming without too much coming at her that just kind of like tramples the roses, right? But going to a feline in heat, as we all know, with a little bit more patience and pause so we can actually see if she wants to come all the way towards us. So if a man has that beautiful, delightful experience of a seductress coming his way, I think there's a beautiful opportunity for men to rest into that receiving of, okay, what if I don't actually take too much more action here and just kind of see how close this kitty wants to purr, right? How close does she actually want to get? If I don't go, ooh, she's offering me this. Yes, I want it. I'm going in, right? Lean
Yes.
back, opportunities, and
Mhm.
actually see what she continues to want to do as she feels the safety of the space being offered to her to take charge.
Ooh, love that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that and the that spaciousness in the receiving. That really landed for me. There's yeah, I think that for many men it's a typical response to like be met with that seductive energy and just want to dive in, be like, ah, yes. And then there can be a role reversal there. She might approach that with like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing. And then as soon as the man feels that, he might be so hungry and thirsty for that, that all of a sudden he now takes that more active role. And in doing so could do a disservice to that feline energy that wants to just kind of like be on her time and moving in and take him on that ride, and that ability and capacity for us to receive, to truly receive. There's blocks for a lot of us around that, men and women, and probably particularly for men. And so I think that you really nailed something there around when we're in that receiving, if we're so blessed to be in that receiving role as a man, can we really lean back and allow her to come to us on her time, and allow the spaciousness for her expression to come through as it wants to authentically. And then the one piece that I would add in there, is in that leaning back and in that receiving, feel that we also do have a role to play as men in the encouraging of that, giving the affirmation of like, ooh, yeah, you look so
Yeah.
sexy. I'm like, oh, that feels amazing. Thank you. And we can still be in that leaning back, but encouraging, because it could also be that there's, like you spoke to, there can be ancestral blocks of, is this safe? And there can also be self-conscious blocks of, maybe she's not feeling as sexy as she might want to in her body, or maybe she's, having some doubts come up. And so we can kind of feed that fire and offer that kitty the encouragement to be like, oh yeah, baby, like, yes, please, more, please. But on your time, I'm ready to receive, and I'm here to like, yeah, stoke that fire. What is that? Does that feel like accurate to you? What comes up for you around that?
Yeah, I love that. I feel so often like the feminine is the source of the eros in so many ways. And then the masculine, as you said, is there to tend the fire and to stoke the fire and to stoke the flame. And just in that beautiful analogy we were using with the cat, it can also really work with a fire as well, right? That we can do too much and put out a fire. We can meddle too much and the flames go down, because what does a fire need? Not only fuel, but it also needs air, right? Like it also needs the space as well. Like we can get in there too much sometimes, where then any chance of a flame growing is now gone down. And so I love this analogy also that you mentioned of stoking the fire and tending to the fire. Definitely, definitely. I love that. The spaciousness, just to let everything grow and grow. And then the man is there to kind of guide and weave and tends to this flame. But the woman is there in her dance, right? In her cosmic erotic dance of being the fire, of bringing the heat. Yeah. And I think that is it's so deeply healing for women, in fact, to know that they can fully embody this siren part of themselves, and to, as we said, be respected and revered because of it, and not just be like objectified and now kind of thought, oh, I kind of saw this side of you, and truly being sexual now makes me feel like you're a little bit less of a moral woman, right? But rather, really, as you said, that verbal encouragement that she can be fully free in this expression of her freaky side, and know that her partner and her lover is just that much more infatuated with all these facets of her, with all these sides of her, that being a cyclical being of a woman means that she gets to play with all of these different various archetypes that want to come up in different weeks, in different chapters of life.
Yeah, there was something I wanted to ask as well, Emily, I'm loving this discussion on the nuances of giving and receiving and being in the different poles and allowing the woman to be the source of eros and this exploration, because for me it's very new, even in my partnership, even in the last couple of years. And one thing that I picked up along the way, I've heard from other teachers, especially in the BDSM space, is talking about adoration and allowing your woman to adore you and to praise you and to worship you as a man. And of course, there's plenty of spaces to worship her as well. But ensuring that there is that space where we're not always leaning in, penetrating her or filling her or giving to her, but allowing her to come to us in that dynamic. And Hawks, I know you spoke a bit to like actively receiving, and there's so many nuances to this work. And I find for myself, it can feel a little bit performative for me to lean back. Kind of like my authenticity is I'm a Sagittarius too. I'm like Leo rising. I'm all fire. I just like love leaning in. I love intensity. I'm an adrenaline junkie. So like I think I'm very wired for intensity. And oftentimes for me it is that I question my authenticity when I'm leaning back, it's like it feels performative sometimes, and so I wonder, like, oftentimes it feels like when I have been exploring this, it's like I'll get really stoic, and like I'll get almost like withdrawn. So I'm wondering if there's any last pieces you could offer in that perspective, or with that particular challenge of like how a man can stay engaged. I heard Hawks, you say like, verbalizing your affirmations and things like that. But is there any, and I know eye contact, breath, maybe just staying in my own feeling and her just feeling me feeling is like my own answer to that. But are there any thoughts you have around that?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm giggling at my own audacity in this, but I'm like, sounds like someone's got to tie you up, Ben. They just got to tie you up to the post, and then you can actually, because there is something so freeing about the binding in which the ropes hold us, right? And so the ropes in a holding then gives the opportunity of like, there isn't even now any kind of mental war between passive or active. It's just like, I'm here in the state and
Mhm.
I can fully surrender in. So I even wonder if in that kind of dynamic, there's an opportunity for some of that work to happen outside of the bedroom as well, like the sitting
Mhm.
still in the meditation and the getting curious about everything that happens in stillness, right? About like the endless sensation that happens when we're doing nothing. Like what is actually there when we continually remove more and more of the sensatory, that's not the right word, of the sensation or stimulus input. What is always there? Like what is that meditative, pure experience of what is always surging, moving, coming into being, and falling away when nothing is happening. So I think there's an opportunity to lean even more into like, what does it look like to even just restrict my own ability to be active so that there's a surrender. There's a surrender in the constraints of the moment, right? Just to have a totally different experience of all of it. Yeah, and I think that's something all people are working on. All of us are continually working on this ability to melt back a little bit more fully in I am enough, I've done enough, I have nothing to prove. This is just time for me to receive. I think that's something that
Mhm.
all people are continually learning to let themselves have more of.
Yeah, I love that. And I assume, as we're speaking to this, it is this role reversal. I can like map that exactly. I could sense that in my woman as well, just as much as within myself. And then on this plane, I think it's like there is this yin yang, like we are actually one, like in role playing these different, dom and sub, top, bottom, surrendered, and lead. And it's funny you mentioned ropes. I literally had a shibari session where I like tied up my partner just a few hours ago. So I was like laughing that. But yeah, I do think a space for myself to receive that, whether through my partner or someone else, I'm sure. And also I appreciate you bringing in meditation as like
Mm.
me sitting in the emptiness of sensation of zero intensity and finding the pleasure and the beauty and the surging amount of energy in that, which I've touched in small ways, but it's a beautiful reminder for the work I can do outside of my relationship entirely. So, yeah, I really appreciate that, Emily.
Yeah, I had a good chuckle there as well, Ben, when you brought up the ropes, Emily, because I was just thinking, don't give him a dose of his own medicine, because I know that Ben enjoys shibari and he's skilled with that, and it was like, yeah, that, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. Not even
Mhm.
knowing that about men, but but being able to intuit like a little dose of your own medicine. Uh, and yeah, Ben, I love this discussion. I want to share just from my personal experience because I feel like I can relate to what you've shared with the a lot of fiery energy and the adrenaline patterns of seeking adrenaline in my life. And one thing that I've noticed in the practice of consciously leaning back when I learned about that several years ago and started to put it into action, I actually notice in the leaning back for me a lot of the time, there is an activation within my system because it
Mhm.
feels different, because it's it's converse to what I might naturally be inclined to do. And so the leaning back can actually ignite some fire within me where I feel a little hit of adrenaline. I feel this like and I also think about it like the magnetism of attraction because by leaning back, when there is connection there already, it's like creating a stronger pull. And so what I'll often do is in that leaning back, tune into, like you were saying, feeling into the felt sense of my body and feel this. I can feel this like little flutteriness of this
Mhm.
energy that's pulling me in, but I'm actually leaning back a little. And then another piece that you spoke to, Ben, with the eye contact and breath is where I will allow that energy to still come through me is in my eyes. And I'll be leaning back physically, but with my eyes, I'm like, like, it's like I'm here with you and I want you and I'm inviting you to come towards me, but physically I'm going to be here
Mhm.
in this intensity of energy within me that wants to lean in. So yeah, it's a fun little exploration. I'm glad you brought that in, and I know we're coming close to our time, and I want to make sure, Emily, that we get to this fertility awareness piece. And I think
Mm,
like
yeah.
perhaps a good segue into that would be you also mentioned some of our the capacity for men and women to understand more accurately where
Mhm.
a woman is at in her cycle based on indicators like smell, taste. You mentioned cervical mucus, which for me has always been the most telltale sign of okay, fertility is in the fertility is has arrived. The cervical mucus is here, and so could you offer a few of those physiological indicators for us as men to start to be more aware of that will give us information around where she's at in her cycle, and then perhaps you'd like to segue from that into what it is we can do to be more conscious with contraception or conscious and intentional with conception. So I'll just, yeah, pass it to you with that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Definitely. One thing I love about being a femme educator is I get to teach on everything. It's like I'm here talking with you guys about, erotic charge. I also get to teach period positivity parties to like preteens, you know what I mean? And then, and everything in between, everything in between. But what is the queen of every conversation of everything I do and teach as a femme educator? Cervical mucus, which you'll also hear me call fertile fluid. So, cervical mucus or fertile fluid. And one way to think about it is where there is flow, there is fertility. So, whether it is the creamy discharge of a man's fertility or whether it is the creamy, clear, stretchy discharge of a woman's fertility. So earlier in the conversation, I was centering estrogen as this libido support during the fertile time in the way that estrogen literally moves the cervix out of the way and stimulates all of the different hormone pathways to be in this more sexually charged state. But the queen of that entire process is the cervical mucus that estrogen makes. So not only is the cervix softening and opening and moving out of the way during a fertile time, but estrogen is telling our cervix to produce sperm food. That's what cervical mucus or fertile fluid is. It is sperm food. If sperm come into contact with cervical mucus, that's what keeps the sperm alive for up to 5 days. So it's not accurate when we say sperm can live inside a woman's body for up to 5 days. That's not true. During infertile times, the acidity of the vaginal canal will kill 99% of sperm within a minute and kill the remaining 1% within a few hours. Because, as I was saying, internal organs want to be protected. What's the sperm doing here? The vagina is, in fact, an acidic sperm killing machine. So it's during the fertile time that the estrogen tells the cervix to make this fertile fluid that on an erotic level not only means that she is mentally more spontaneously open to desire, but that she's lubricated. She's making this lubrication during this fertile time that is also preparing her body to be more receptive and open to penetration. And that fluid, sperm eat it and also rub up against it to remove their own phylums, because sperm come with their own little condoms, a little cap on them, and they require the process of butting up against this fluid in order to help wash off the phylum before they continue on their journey, whether it's tomorrow or in 3 or in 5 days to go meet the sperm. So what I teach women to do is to understand how to check, how to look for, and how to interpret their cervical mucus, because it is the number one most important body sign of understanding when you're fertile and when you're not. There's a lot of femtech out there that overly emphasizes basal body temperature and tracking your temperature. That is important. That's a secondary sign that I teach, but the top most important body sign to understand for knowing where you're at in your cycle and what's going on is this beautiful fertile fluid. And as we talked about, even with things like smell, taste, touch, when a woman has her non-fertile discharge, which is her normal vaginal cell slough that we make every single day, that will perhaps be more tart, or the word I already used, more acidic, if either herself or a partner wants to taste it. And then during that fertile time, with the cervical mucus being more alkaline in order to match the pH of sperm to support conception, it has more of a neutral taste, more of a scentless, odorless taste associated with it. The other thing is that cervical mucus has more staying power than arousal fluid. So another way to tell the difference is that when a woman is turned on and she is secreting through her vaginal walls, actually, it comes right through her vaginal walls from her Bartholin's glands, her arousal fluid, it also is clear and stretchy, which is one way, not the only way, but one way that a fertile fluid can look, clear and stretchy. But cervical mucus dissipates. So if you play with cervical mucus and you want to test it in real time with your partner, both of you, you'll notice that the more you test and play with arousal fluid, it disappears, it evaporates, which is why someone shouldn't feel any kind of shame if they want to have some extra oils nearby to help keep things comfortable, because arousal fluid quickly disappears. Cervical mucus, if you and your partner want to play around with it, it will have staying power. So you'll be able to stretch it again and again, and it will have the same level of consistency and give, because it is literally the elixir of life. So it's got a little bit of punch with it. It's got a little bit of austerity with it. It can stick around because it's there to help transport the sperm. So it can be a really fun primal exercise for partners, not only to tune into the cycle on this very nerdy objective level, which is my wheelhouse and what I love to do and teach, so they can feel really confident in knowing when they're fertile and when they're not. But we don't want our fertility awareness method practice to be a neck above practice like it can be for many people, in which we're just analyzing the data points to know our fertile status, to know if we're available or not available to our partner that day, right? It's about taking the fertility awareness practice below the neck and also letting it be something that is all about sensation and feeling and enhancing the nerdiness with this intuitive embodiment of, okay, yeah, I checked exactly how Emily told me to check. I put the code on the chart exactly how she told me to put the code on the chart, but I also made sure to pause and taste it. I also made sure to pause and smell it. I also made sure to get attuned to these beautiful sensation changes that take place over the course of my cycle. So I can feel more confident in identifying what's a fluid that is fertile and what's a normal, healthy fluid that is not indicating fertility, right? Not indicating fertility.
Lee, when you say put the code on the chart, are you speaking to women? Is that part of a process that you take
Yeah.
women through to become
Yeah.
more familiar?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
not for
So
us as men putting a code on a chart. Yeah, I just
that's
want you
that's
just mentioned something there that I was like, okay, what's that?
for sure. That's so great. With many things in so many dynamics, I think we all know that this idea of 50-50 doesn't really work. It's 100-100, right? Because nothing is ever going to be able to be this perfect, even thing. So,
Do you
what
could
I
you
love
explain
to
what
present,
could you just explain what you mean by that 50-50 versus 100-100 for someone who might not
sure,
be familiar with?
50-50 meaning a relationship dynamic in which most people want to make sure they're just doing their part. And it's a focus on, well, I did my part and now you have to do your part, rather than two people asking themselves, how can I be a better partner to each other? Like how can I continually step up my game more and more to become even more attuned, to become even more intimate, to become even more generous, everybody together, so that together you just have two people that are interested in continuing to feed into each other to support the blossoming and growth and vitality of everyone involved, rather than people thinking, well, I kind of did my part and the rest of that's yours to deal with, right? This opportunity of more synergy, of 1 + 1 = 3, right? Point 0.5 and point 0.5 is only going to give you 1. But if you have 1 + 1, you're getting that dynamic of 3 out of it. So that's what I meant by that. And I think that a beautiful way that we can bring that to charting, and the reason I mentioned it is because we're never going to get the sharing of contraception down to some perfect little bento box of, oh, your responsibility and my responsibility and your role and my role. Because at the end of the day, I love when I hear men say, I know my partner's cycle, I'm in touch with my partner's cycle, even people saying, I know her cycle better than herself. But I always think to myself, but there's no actual way that a man can know a cycle as deeply as a woman if she is interested in being in tune with it. There is a level of intimacy in her checking and charting her fertile fluids that the man is never going to be able to show up equally for. So, what I love to offer to couples is that cervical mucus is the sign that she is primarily checking. And of course, if people want to go deeper in learning with me, it's something that we do every time we use the toilet as women. Every time our pants are down, we do a quick little check that's incorporated right into our wipes, anyways. We do it every day of the cycle, all the time, but it becomes very intuitive. It's not some big brain thing that we need to work on. And I teach them a proper little modality called SOFT: sensation, observation, finger test. I won't go deeper right now, but we've got whole little steps we follow. It's not just a kind of subjective, see, notice, feel. That's when you're going to have like a 70-ish% rhythm method type contraception approach. If you really want 99% accuracy that you can trust, we have to get a little bit more devoted with all of it. So that's what I teach women to do in my group program, because we work together over a handful of cycles, because you won't learn all this in one cycle. You need to chart, as you were saying, the code on the paper that the woman would do. And then we have my eyes on your chart to check in with all of it and to see, oh, I see this missing piece of information there that would be critically important in having more confidence about whether you're fertile that day or not. And then for one of the secondary biomarkers, I always say, if you're living with a partner, he can do the basal body temperature. The thermometer can live on his bedside table. He can set the alarm on his phone of when it needs to be taken every morning. Doesn't have to be perfectly consistent. There's so much misinformation about FAM out there where it sounds so complicated that people feel overwhelmed and discouraged from trying it, because they think it needs to be so perfect, and if they sleep in on a Sunday, they're going to get knocked up accidentally. If you learn property from a FAM educator, then little human things like that do not shift the accuracy of what's going on, because we aren't just teaching you some textbook app style, trust the app, trust the algorithm, it'll know when they make mistakes all the time. We're teaching you how to be in the waves of the human experience of reality and be consistent and devoted and trusting in your charting. So I like to say the partner can totally do the temperature part if you're living together, where his alarm goes off, he grabs that thermometer, he rolls over, a little spoon, a little thermometer under the armpit. A lot of people think we have to take the temperature vaginally, but we're not taking your vaginal temperature. We're taking your basal body temperature. So under the arm is the most consistent and reliable place to do so. He can roll over and do that and have that timer where the glass thermometer or the digital thermometer is there for 10, 15 minutes. And he could actually be looking at the number and writing that down, right? So that there's a partnership of she's doing the mucus, he's doing the temperature, and it's about weaving that conversation into your daily life. I have some students who also have gotten in the habit of that chart lives on the fridge in the kitchen. It's not even in the bedside table. It's on the fridge in the kitchen, so that there's still absolutely direct, intimate conversations happening. But there also is just like a place that someone can refer to if someone's out the door early for work that morning and a conversation didn't happen. A partner can also look and glance at the chart and have a sense of where their woman is in their cycle, right? Of like, ooh, I see she's just ended her fertile time. Today was officially the last day of fertility. So tonight, I'm going to surprise her with a beautiful dinner when she comes home. A, because I know the winds are changing from follicular to luteal, and she'd probably enjoy receiving in that sense. And B, I know that there's a chance for us to go a little bit deeper into intimacy tonight, because there's no chance of a pregnancy. So there's no need for anyone to hold back on anything if everyone's consenting, of course. So there's so much of fun opportunity, right? To not just only keep the fam charting data focused, but how does that information in this super tangible, concrete, nerdy way help everyone move through the cyclical rhythms of what it means to be in a relationship with a woman beyond the assumption of cycle day counting, right? Beyond the assumption she's on this cycle day, so she'll feel like this. What is the real-time information from her body telling us instead?
Beautiful, Emily. Yeah, love that. I love how you were able to put so much concisely, and I know there's so much more to dive into here, and there's, you did a great job, I'd say, consolidating all of that.
Like to just highlight a few things before we wrap up here. Some of the key takeaways for men here, and I heard you, Emily, speaking to the temperature taking, as that could be a man's role, and for the fluid check, finger test, fluid check, that can be a woman's role. And then I also heard you speak to the importance of not approaching things 50-50, but 100-100. And I just want to like dive in here and really encourage men to become intimately aware of what is going on with your partner's fluids. And I think this is like one of the infinite numbers of reasons why it's so great for us as men to regularly go down on our partner. If you want to understand what's going on with her vaginal fluids, get your face and your nose in there. Taste it. You will taste it and you will smell it. And like you were speaking to Emily there, so when she's not fertile, there's going to be a more tartness to the flavor, because it's more acidic. So there's an opportunity for us to get really familiar with, okay, what is that like when I'm down on her? What does that taste? What does that smell? And then when she's more fertile, it's going to be more neutral, maybe even a little sweet. And I mean, those were your words, but that's what I have found sometimes. And there's the texture of it. And I wanted to just double click on that, because you spoke to the finger testing, but I wonder if you could just really clearly let us know as men how, when we have some of her vaginal fluids on our fingertips, what are we looking for? What is that cervical movement
Yeah.
look like when we're playing with it on our fingertips?
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to simplify it my best because even when people learn with me, it's like we have like a couple hours all about how to check the cervical mucus. So, what I might teach instead is one of the most common misconceptions so that people can get clarity around what is more accurate. When you're looking for cervical mucus, the reason why a woman will be able to do a better job more accurately knowing when she's fertile or not fertile is that libido and arousal interfere with that in the moment because we're also making arousal fluid. So only when you're in a sexual experience, there will be fluids. So the woman checks all the time throughout the day, every time she's using the bathroom, because when she's not in a particularly aroused state, she'll still be making that fertile fluid. So we actually often teach women that you don't count what you see in sex because you're going to see fluids in sex. We're checking what we're seeing just in our normal day-to-day mundane life to kind of see how it dances around that. But really for the men to also understand what they're looking for, there's the progression through the fertile wave. So before the fertile wave, her baseline will just maybe be quite dry, a little bit damp, maybe something a little bit shiny, right? If you were to touch her at the beginning of time together when she is maybe not in a fully aroused place, there might just be a little bit of a glisten on the finger. Because when we say dry days in femme, what we mean is dry like your lips, dry like just the inside of your mouth, not dry like your arm. There's always going to be a little bit of fluid there. And then as she moves into that fertile time and starts making these fertile fluids, it may start appearing like it is sticky or creamy or lotiony. So think about playing with like a glue stick and the texture of a glue stick and how that could begin to arrive, and then moving into something like a body lotion or a salve. What's so important that is a giant misconception to people, where I don't want to overwhelm everybody, there's two types of fertile fluid, non-peak and peak, and non-peak is also fertile. Sticky, creamy, lotiony, these are fertile. They will keep sperm alive. The peak fluid that is either clear, very stretchy, or very lubricative is also fertile. It's super fertile. So both are fertile. A big misconception is that people are looking only for peak type mucus, clear, stretchy, lubricative, and they ignore the early days of sticky, cloudy, creamy, lotiony as also signs of fertility. So that's what I teach women to do, as we said, over the intimacy of a handful of cycles to gain that confidence and that finesse around what is just my normal discharge and then what is the beginning of this. And so for men also, a big misconception that is good to know that I already used in my words, but most people don't track immediately, is that this peak fertile fluid is either clear or stretchy or lubricative. It doesn't need to be all three. Your woman can be so fertile and so wet that there is nothing for you to pick up and stretch and play with because it's water. And what is easier for sperm to swim in than water? So the more watery it becomes, the more fertility is there. So sometimes people will, exactly, they've seen a couple Instagram reels, they've heard one podcast talk about something clear and stretchy, and then they lock in to only looking for clear and stretchy. But it can just be clear, lubricative water. It could be stretchy beyond an inch and be creamy because every person is different. Every vaginal microbiome is different. So we have these rules and these guidelines that we use in fertility awareness method in order to objectively classify these things so that we're confident. Is this a non-fertile day? Is this a non-peak fertile day? Or is this a peak fertile day, right? Those last two both being fertile. But all of those different kind of categories that I used, creamy, cloudy, sticky, stretchy, wet, These are all different ways that the cervical mucus can appear. And I love what you said, Ian, about, regularly making sure that you are tending to that woman with oral sex in your own development of the intimacy of all of that. That's such a beautiful, deep way to make all of it fun, right? Even on a conception journey. Right? When someone's not seeking to avoid anymore and they now want to become pregnant, what does it look
Well,
like for that not just to be this kind of robust chore, robotic goal everyone's trying to cross off their list, but also keep that very erotic? So I love that. And then a couple other things I was really thinking about with your actionable steps is one thing is that whenever I have women work with me and learn deeply with me for a handful of, cycles in my program, I always make it so clear to them, our live calls are for us women, but your men can come to our one-on-one. So they get a couple one-on-ones with me during the journey. They can decide, is that just a conversation for them and I, or is their partner coming with them to that call with me? And I always make it very clear that those modules that they're learning through are also for them and their partner, that he can just pop in on one, she can show him an interesting clip, or they can decide together to sit down and do that learning together so that they are actually forming the charting habit together as couples, as a partner, and then she's coming to those live calls for the community in just that beautiful sacred sister space. And that last piece of 100 of 100, I don't know, she's the one doing the program and charting her cycle. Maybe you pay for a little bit of it, right? Maybe that's part of that actionable piece as well. That if your woman is going to learn conscious contraception charting, maybe you cover a couple of the monthly payments for her, right? As a part of you showing up for it as well. So you can find me anywhere under the name Moujamoon, Mouja, Moon. Instagram, YouTube, but the best place and best way to connect with me is to get on my email list. That's the place that I'm most consistently sending out free mini body literacy lessons, resources, connecting you to free new YouTube videos, podcast interviews like this one. So there's lots of valuable learning that takes place for free on my email list first and foremost. And then, if people are interested in joining my program, I do have a new program starting this October. We work together for 9 months because it's spacious support over that whole season. It's not 12 weeks of wham, bam, thank you, man, now figure out the rest on your own. It's making sure you have me right there in your pocket for voicemails, for questions, for sending pictures of your cervical mucus to me, because the questions you have after 7-8 months of cycling, of charting, are very different than the questions you have after 1 and 2. So really making sure that I'm there to support you and that you feel confident to fly away and continue with the beautiful life journey of confidence in your charting. So if anyone wants to reach out about that, that'll be easy to find just by getting on that email list.
All right. Thank you, Emily, so much for coming on the podcast today. Thank you to all you listeners out there. Thank you to the men in our community who make this show possible. If you're interested in connecting more with Emily, we'll be dropping her links in the show notes below, so check that out. And if you're interested in joining a future training, if you're a man out there interested in brotherhood, interested in diving into this work more deeply, check us out at mensexualmastery.com. We'll see you there, brother. Blessings.